provided that they were involved, their disciple was involved in the New Testament.
Yeah.
Now, the order came much later. The order of the books in the New Testament came much later.
And I think that's what she was asking. Do we know why they came to us in the order they came?
No,
No.
Ray saying letters were longest to shortest. Is that a question mark? I don't know. Where are you, Ray? Hold on. I've got a lot of screens here. Where's Ray?
No, in the book he mentioned that Paul's letters were arranged longest to shortest, and he goes through all 21 of them, and 8 of them are in one sequence, and then 5 of them are in another sequence. But it kind of surprised me that he said that they were arranged from the longest to the shortest.
Mm.
That was the modern sequence of them.
Which is interesting, because in the chronology, Thessalonians are very short letters. 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. It's like he started writing and then wrote longer and longer and longer letters. Because Romans is one of his longest letters.
When John says each church wanted to be represented, what is each church? Is that like Coptic?
There was a bishop at Rome. There was a bishop in Jerusalem. There was a bishop in Alexandria. Okay, there were 7 of them total. Each one wanted their people to get them someplace into the New Testament.
It's kind of like, I want my favorite book in there.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the book we've been reading. I want my favorite book in there.
And especially since they ascribed themselves as having developed from an apostle.
Yes.
They wanted their apostle.
Interesting.
Which brings us to the first question, the one I asked you to wrestle with. If you could only have 5 books in the New Testament, and you may not group the Gospels into one, that's no fair. If you could only have 5 books in the New Testament, which would they be? And just give us a brief notion of why. You don't have to write a theological dissertation. So what are you? Oh, he wants to tell you his 5 favorite. Go ahead.
Okay. This was almost instantaneous on my part. I want Matthew, because I get 3 books in one. Okay, I want John, because it's a absolutely unique gospel. I want Acts, because it's the only piece of history that we have in the New Testament. I want one of the epistles of Paul, and I'm going to choose Romans, because it's probably the best that he has in there. And I want
Revelation.
Yes, I guess Revelation is my choice. There are alternates to I'm staying with it.
All right, Mike has his hand up. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, it's going to be rather redundant, because for many of the same reasons. I picked Matthew because I figured it was most representative of the 3 synoptic. I picked John because he's very spiritual. I picked history. We only have Acts. I picked Romans because I think it's really powerful. And I picked 1 Corinthians because I love it.
Very good. June said that their breakout group talked about it last week, and they picked the same things that John picked: Matthew and John, Acts, Romans, and maybe Revelation. Ray, go ahead.
Yeah, I picked, and all of you guys have got very studied and intelligent choices, reasons for your selection. But number one, I'm not a big fan of Paul, but obviously everybody else is, so that's good. I'll take that. But I picked Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, and Acts, and the reason, and this is a simpleton,
No.
the simpleton solution, and that is that and Faith mentioned last week that Christology is a big issue in selection of the New Testament and so forth, and that kind of resonates with me, because those are the stories about Jesus, the life of Jesus, you know, the whole reason that we're here, you know, doing what we're doing and living the way that we live. And I'll just stick with the Jesus story.
Okay.
Ray, I totally agree with you. I said the same thing to Faith. I'm taking all 4. So
Okay.
I think simpleton we may be, but it is good.
Okay.
Yeah, but what's your 5th one?
I don't.
Acts.
Axe.
Yeah, Acts is the 5th one.
I'll take Axe. Yeah.
Okay.
Robin, go ahead, and I think Patty's next. Go ahead, Robin.
I was just going to kind of agree. I had to go with Matthew, Luke, and John, because kind of Jesus' wisdom teaching, the parables, they're spread between Matthew and Luke. I would have to give up something I didn't want to give up if I threw either of those out. And then John, you need John because, you know, it's the spiritual gospel. And then like Mike, I went with Romans and 1 Corinthians, just because it's the church kind of basis. And because I love Corinthians, his thing on love is in Corinthians. But like Ray, I had to give the Gospels primacy because that's Jesus.
Yeah, I agree. Patty, go ahead. Oops, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, when I saw this first question, it kind of expressed my ignorance because I was hard pressed to even name 5. But so I went with, okay, what do I know? And it's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what's my favorite go-to? 1 Corinthians. It's got to be about love.
Yeah, perfect. There we go.
Yeah.
Who else do we have? What other? Hand?
Remember, there's no right or wrong to
No.
this one because we're just saying, what do you think? So it isn't like there's one right answer here.
Anyone? Ruth, go ahead.
Oh, hold on a minute. Oh, okay, I'm on.
Yeah.
Matthew, Mark, Acts, John, 1 Corinthians, because I want Christmas, I want Pentecost, I want the prodigal son, and I want that whole thing on love, and Corinthians 15 I love as well. So it's got
Easter too.
well, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Donna, go ahead. Nope, I'm sorry. I think I clicked. Go ahead, unmute yourself one more time. There you go.
I have a question. Why did you choose the number 5?
Oh, it was just an arbitrary number for me. And part of what this indicates is, yes, you know, where your preferences are. But this is the way we often read the Bible. We do read it selectively. You know, there is a question later on, number C. Do you give the same weight to all the books in the New Testament? And the obvious answer would be no, we do not. But then why don't we?
And the other interesting thing is, I think this I read in Adam Hamilton's book as well, was that even Jesus and the disciples and the apostles were only tended to quote certain things from the Hebrew scriptures. They weren't quoting all the Hebrew scriptures. They kind of picked it. They were picking and choosing, you know, their 5 or 6 favorites. And that's what you found consistently referenced in the New Testament. So I think it's just, isn't there something like where our brains just can't process more than like 5 things or something? Or like, isn't it when you give like a speech, they're like no more than 5 action items because people can't do more than that, you know, or 3 or whatever it is. So see, I don't know, maybe it's just human nature. 3.
Paul's got his hand up.
Paul, go ahead. 5.
Oh, 5.
5. Okay, he's saying 5. Yeah. See, so maybe that's just the way we work.
So if we reverse it and say, what do you want to remove?
Oh, all right.
If you got a chance to remove books
Go ahead, Ruth.
from the New
Oh,
Testament.
and John. All right, go ahead.
Let's
Okay,
let's
my
take
favorite candidates for removal.
Yes, go ahead.
2nd and 3rd John and Jude.
second and third John, and Jude. Okay.
Any of those three,
Why?
because they're repetitive.
They're repetitive. Okay. Ruth, go ahead.
Take out Timothy because it's got that thing about women keeping silent.
Oh, yeah, I'm all about getting rid of. I was like, Timothy's got to go. It was like my first thing. I don't like any of the Timothy stuff.
But we got it. But we have to keep Romans, even though it has that thing about gay people. But we got to keep Romans because it's really beautiful.
Yeah, I probably would. Yeah, I hear you. There's a question about what books we'd remove too. What about removing Revelation? That's what June. That's what June
Yeah,
said.
Eleanor's got her hand up.
All right, go ahead, Eleanor. Hey, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself?
Oh, I'm trying
There
to.
you go. There you go.
I was just saying Revelations also because it's scary. I don't like it.
I
mean,
mean, that's a problem.
that class, and I learned a lot about it, but it's still really scary. So to me,
I agree. I was in a Bible study where a lot of people were taking everything literally. And I don't think that that's really what we believe as Methodists. So I agree with Eleanor. It was pretty scary.
Go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, I don't know if it was in this class or something that I heard recently that there was a lady who descended from slaves, first generation, and she specifically wrote out Paul altogether, everything that Paul ever wrote. And she said the reason was because when the slave masters would get the slaves together to do church services on Sunday mornings, they would always preach from Paul, who said that slaves be faithful to your master, and on and on and on, and that would, and ever since then she and none of her family would ever listen to anything or read Paul. I don't know if that was in this class or somewhere else.
No, I've heard that story too. That is true. Paul was not liked. Now, the interesting thing is Ruth mentioned where Timothy says women keep silent.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the debatable letters as to whether or not Paul actually wrote that. So in some ways he gets a bad rap for things he didn't say or might not have said, but
he still said some things that were not that great.
Context.
That's right. Well, and that's right. When you put it in context, it all really is, it is what it is, right?
I mean, I had a young friend who literally any part in the New Testament that she didn't like Paul's notes against women, she just cut it out. She took a scissor and cut it out.
Well, Thomas Jefferson did that.
He most certainly did. We forget that, don't we?
That's right. Thomas Jefferson did that.
He took out all the miracles and the resurrection.
Okay. Well.
Jefferson's Bible was truly holy.
Yes, he was truly holy. Go ahead.
No, that was my pun.
No, that was John's pun. You stole his pun.
Oh, you stole his pun, Paul.
Yeah.
Great minds think alike. Okay, so I am having some serious technical difficulties with my new computer because I keep trying to bring up the agenda so I can, there it is. So I can paste the questions in the chat. I'm going to do it right now. I have it. What? I don't know. Okay, now it's
See,
gone.
what we really are talking about in our preferences and what we like or dislike, we do weight passages so that when we say, I believe in the Bible, I order my life by the Bible, are we actually, or are we picking or choosing those passages that guide us? And what does that say about how we view the Bible then? There's a question for you.
Go ahead, Mike, and then Barbara.
Well, but we have to view the Bible in light of, we're 2,000 years later, basically. Hamilton had one reference to circumcision and how it today is not what Paul was preaching against back then. And there are many other things which our societal views have changed. And we run up against that then, to me, constantly with, hanging on to old views versus new views. Which is right? How do we figure out which is right?
Mhm.
It's a conflict which, well, I think God is trying to teach us how to answer those questions through the Bible by bringing them up.
Mm.
So to me, it's the Bible, we like to say, is hard and fixed, but it really isn't, because it's an example of the way the writers thought, and we can see how well some of those things don't work today. So then you have to look at the whole question of, well, okay, where is God leading us? And so, no, it's not fixed in time.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Barbara.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking the same. It's like, yeah, some stuff is antiquated. If they have something about slaves and stuff, well, that doesn't mean we have to have slaves now and stuff. So, yeah, I'm just saying the same thing. Thanks.
So Shannon asked, was the author of the first letter of John the same author as the Gospel of John?
Not likely. It's thought that 1 John, 2 John, 3 John came out of the Johannine school in Ephesus, similar to John's writings. Like there was a Pauline school, there was a Johannine school, but not likely that they were the same author. Not likely that John of Revelation and John of the Gospels were the same author.
And then Ruth, so talk more. Ruth really struggled with that. How do we know what's right? Elaborate there, Ruth.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, I mean, it's easy for me to say, okay, I can, the Bible is wonderful and I can learn from it and follow it and etc., except for those passages that tell me that I'm incompatible with Christian teaching, which is quoting for the Book of Discipline instead of the Bible.
Yes, those are not the same.
And they are not the same. But anyway, the question of picking and choosing, I mean, that, descends into, well, this is my point of view and this is what I think is right. And that's what you think. And we're all happy together. But how do you know? How do you know what's right? How do you know what's wrong? How do you know what it really says? I mean, it's, easy for me to say, well, I'm only going to follow this part. I'm only going to follow this part of what Jesus says and not the hard part, So, I mean, that's my question. I mean, I really struggle with that.
I think it's
And part of that, John's going to make a comment in a minute, but part of that is going to be discussed in the chapters coming up, where we talk about authority and what is the Bible and how to interpret it. But he wanted to answer your...
Yeah, Ruth, when you read a book, how much credibility do you put into the author? And the reason that I ask this is that we have a whole group of people who wrote the New Testament, okay? And you can tell who wrote what section by how they use words, etc. And I think you actually have to put some of your trust in what you think about the person who wrote it. For example, Matthew had a very Jewish orientation, okay? The Mark was also Jewish, but written in a hurry. And then we have Quella, which is Q. And that is a collection from other people. Now, when you look at that and you compare it with the Book of John or any of the Pauline letters, the authors are totally distinct. You have to pick the author that you can relate to best.
We got Eleanor and then we got Robin and.
Go ahead, Eleanor, and then Robin.
Well, I just have a quick question about that, because now in that paper that you sent out, the PDF, it was saying, didn't it say that certain people wrote their version of the books and then they decided they didn't like it, so they like beheaded them or threw them out or whatever they did to get rid of it, and then they got different ones. And so what my thought always is how do I know that the one that whoever it was in charge of right then, or in charge right then, was picked to go in and say, this is it? Because how do I even know if I agree with what that person whoever it was that decided that what they read before they didn't like was right? I mean, I don't, that's the part I'm when I read that, I was kind of like, okay, now what am I thinking? It's like,
Okay.
That's what we wrestle with.
Let's hear the next one, then we'll come back to what Eleanor just asked. Robin.
Yeah, it was back to what John said about, choosing by author. The problem I have with that is, Paul is so prolific. He authored so many things. And some of them, 1 Corinthians, just like, they ring like a bell in my heart. They're beautiful. And then there's Women Be Silent, and homosexuality is evil, and slaves obey your masters. And so I can't just say Paul is in this category or Paul is in that category.
I think part of, obviously we don't have the specifics for some of this. We're so far removed from it, and who some of the authors were and why they chose this or why they chose that. But one of the guidelines that I've used is, how does this passage, this word I'm reading, these words I'm reading, how do they measure up to the overarching message of the scripture? Do they make sense in terms of the God I see revealed in Jesus? Would the God that Jesus taught me about, love, mercy, would that God affirm this statement? And then the other side I have to say to myself is, does it work? In my experience, using the Methodist quadrilateral, but in my experience with my reasoning, does it make sense? Does it live out in the world that I live out in? And if it doesn't, I will set the passage aside.
And I was going to piggyback on it. This is why the quadrilateral is actually such an amazing tool, and we don't really spend enough time, I think, using it, because it really does help us.
Does everybody know what that is?
Well, maybe you should.
Yeah, say more. I mean, you've explained it to us before, but a refresher would be good.
Go ahead.
So,
seminary student.
Right, here I go, I'm on the spot. So the Wesley, and he does mention it a little bit in chapter 14, is the Wesleyan quadrilateral is what John Wesley, he didn't actually come up with it though, right? So, but it's been given, it's been attached to the Methodist faith, and I forget the history of who came up with the Wesleyan quadrilateral.
Alfred Outler.
There you go, Alfred Outler. But it's four things. It's scripture, it's reason, it's tradition, and experience. And using those four elements is how you, or how I would wrestle with what's happening in the world, how I want to dissect a particular passage. I have to look at a scripture and I have to say, okay, what's my tradition? How does my tradition connect to this scripture? How does my experience of the world that I live in connect to this scripture? And then how does my reasoning or my knowledge connect to this scripture? What's changed in what we know today? I mean, we know so much more today about science and mathematics and human anatomy and biology compared to what people knew 2,000 years ago. So that really has to feed into how scripture is going to transcend into my context today. So those are kind of the...
When you say tradition though, it's a larger word. It's the tradition of Fiddler on the Roof. Remember the song from Fiddler on the Roof where he goes, tradition? But what he's talking about is something that goes back across the ages. It's tradition with a capital T. It's not just like, well, what does my Methodist tradition say? Or what does my local church tradition say? It's that vast tradition of Christian faith and teaching.
Which I struggle with a little bit with the tradition, because I think too often we don't really know our historical tradition of Christian
Yeah.
faith. And so it's so easy just to say, okay, what do I know about my Methodist tradition? But I think Faith's right, is then you start to learn about, the Christian mystics and that tradition, and that
Yeah.
so much deeper. But most of us, like, I had no knowledge of the Christian mystics until I really spent time learning from Richard Rohr, reading Richard Rohr. I mean, that is amazing stuff. It's rich, it's deep. So yeah, but that's the quadrilateral. So when we talk about that, that's the 4 things that we're diving into. It's funny. I have my first week of residency is coming up, and I just have to tell you, I have to write an essay, right? Just a little essay that they're going to look at. And here's the question. It says one reoccurring theme in theological education is context. To understand what an author is trying to say, for example, we need to pay attention to his or her context. To grasp a passage of scripture more fully, we need to pay attention to things like historical and literary context. Theology itself depends on and responds to variations in context, just as Paul's letters said different things to different first century communities. At the same time, context is not only something out there in the objects of our study or in the text we read. We are shaped by the context into which we are born, the circumstances that help define our upbringing, education, and social location. Some aspects of our personal context may be difficult to recognize because they are so familiar, and yet context has an important role to play in our ministries, since ministries too have context. There is no such thing as a ministry in a vacuum. Anyway, I have to write about my context. So I just thought it's so appropriate that we're having this conversation.
Right.
Anyway, all right, I digress.
Well, one of the debates that I have my students engage in around this topic is several churches and church traditions. And please don't misunderstand, it's not a question of right or wrong. We debate this, okay? Is they ask you to stand for the gospel reading. Have you ever come across that or ever had that? Some of you are nodding, yeah. You stand for the gospel reading. You sit for every other reading, be it from the epistles, the Acts, the Old Testament certainly, or whatever. And so I invite my students into a debate. What is this saying about the weight of the word and the importance of the word? And which perspective would you take?
So does that get us into, because it's 10, we should probably try to break up into some small groups.
Okay.
Although Ruth has a great question. She's like, is there anything in the Bible that any of you completely disagree with in your own life? That would be an
Absolutely.
So there are questions I put up in here. So you could actually talk about, I think Ruth's question is an interesting one to have a conversation over. Do you give the same weight to all books in the New Testament? When you learned that Paul wasn't the author of the letters, did that alter or change your view of them? Why or why not? This was a fun one. Do you think that canon should have it was closed? The canon, the canon was closed, what, in the second 1200?
Oh no, it really didn't get closed until way, way later. Although the 397?
Yeah, 397 was the meeting that chose the books, and it took Constantine to affirm them.
Yeah, but it went way on beyond that. Yeah, but don't worry about it.
But it did close, and there's no option to add any other sacred writings.
Right.
Like you can't, so isn't that interesting that we can't add anything now? So there's that question. And then there's the question, and I literally cannot pull up my agenda, but this one kind of piggybacks on the next one, which is really about, what does it say? Does somebody have it and can read it? It's about if you believe that they're inspired, are we not inspired when we, when pastors or when we write or talk? I forget what the question is. So I think what I'm saying to you in my long-windedness is that you could
Talk about anything you want.
pick one of them. Have your group maybe pick a leader or I don't know, take a poll, pick one of those questions, just one, and talk about it.
And the question I was asking you about standing relates to the one about weight. The weight we give, because when we stand only for the gospel, we are weighting those 4 books above all others in the scripture. Okay, we were going to put.
And your last question, Dana, was: do you think the scripture writers Moses, David, Matthew, and Paul were inspired to a greater degree or in a different way than we experience the inspiration and guidance of the Spirit as Christians today? Why or why not?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
And we're going to keep working on that one.
So I'll put you into, let's go in for about 12 minutes and then we'll come back out.
And these are the larger groups, right?
Yeah, there's going to be 5 to 6 participants in a breakout room. Let's go in for 12. Countdown. Okay. All right, go ahead. You can join your breakout room. Hey, Jonathan, can you hear me? We're in breakout rooms. So I'm gonna move you. Can I put you in a breakout room? How do I put you in a breakout room? Where are you? Oh, there you are. I think you can join a breakout room, Jonathan. It should tell you to join. Does it say join breakout room? Here, unmute yourself. I can't hear you.
Okay, I'm unmuting.
Do you see it does it tell you to join breakout room?
No.
Let's see, I'm going to move you to breakout room. I can't put you in one. You have to literally click join.
Okay, but I don't have anything to click on.
It's not in your.
No, it usually flashes across the screen, but I don't see it. I think I'm in your breakout room. You and Carol. Okay.
Carol Sadler and Carol Keys stepped away, so they just haven't clicked join yet.
Oh, okay. All right.
But go down. Are you down on your panel?
Yeah.
You see something that says breakout?
Oh, join breakout room. I apologize. I didn't see it. Okay.
Go ahead. Hey, Carol. Go ahead. You can click and join a breakout room. You can unmute yourself too. You should be able to join. Yep.